Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Melissa Antonka in Lagos. We begin in Ukraine's Dnipro region, the scene of Russian missile strikes in recent days. Tearful neighbors and local residents, overwhelmed by grief, have been leaving flowers and soft toys at a makeshift memorial site. According to authorities, more than 40 people have been confirmed dead in Saturday's strike on an apartment building in the city, making it the deadliest single incident since the war began last February. According to authorities, more than 40 people have been confirmed. Russia has denied intentionally targeting civilians. And as the city reels from the attack, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has been urging the West to speed up decision-making in supplying weapons, insisting that the country needs tanks to repel the Russian forces. Meanwhile, a surgeon in Dnipro's 16th hospital says his surgical ward has been treating a 19-year-old woman with severe injuries caused by the explosion wave when the missile hit the residential building. Kyiv says the mass civilian deaths, which it describes as terrorism, demonstrates why it needs more weapons to defeat Russian forces 11 months after they invaded. Ukrainian officials also acknowledged little hope of finding anyone else alive in the rubble of Saturday's attack. But President Zelensky said the rescue in the central Ukrainian city would go on as long as there is even the slightest chance to save lives. Crossing the border to Russia, the Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu today visited troops involved in Ukraine. The Defense Ministry released the footage of the visit where Mr. Shoigu is seen awarding the troops with medals. The ministry said in a statement posted on its Telegram messaging app that Sergei Shoigu thanked the servicemen who courageously performed tasks in the Special Military Operations Zone and presented state awards to the servicemen for their dedication and heroism. Russia calls its actions in Ukraine a special military operation, while Kyiv and its allies say it is an unprovoked imperialist land grab. And more from the Russian Defense Ministry. It says major changes would be made to its armed forces from 2023 to 2026, with a promise to shake up military structure after months of setbacks on the battlefield in Ukraine. In addition to administrative reforms, which include recreation of the Moscow and Leningrad military districts, the Defense Ministry says it will strengthen the combat capabilities of its naval, aerospace and strategic missile forces. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, during a press conference, said the changes made were necessary because of the proxy war being conducted in Ukraine by the West, which has been sending increasingly heavy weaponry to Ukraine to help it resist Russian forces. The Defense Ministry, which has faced sharp domestic criticism for the ineffectiveness of the drive to take control of large tracts of Ukraine, vowed in December to boost its military personnel to 1.5 million. Well, joining me now for more is Michelle Agati-Shea, his foreign affairs commentator. Glad to have you join me on the program. First, what do you think Russia is getting at with its announcement of major changes to be made to its armed forces, from 2023 to 2026?
Hey, thank you very much for having me, and I think I should start by saying Happy New Year.
As well.
It's good to be speaking with you. Personally, I think that this demonstrates that Russia has woken up to see the coffee. And I say this for two reasons. On the one hand is the fact that going into this war, it was clear, or rather the estimation on the Russian part, was that this was going to be a special military operation. There was a very, very high estimation of what the Russian military capabilities were on the Russian side, as well as a lot of fear on the Western side as to the extent of Russian military capacity. In the time since the war started, it has become clear that that estimation was overstated. Within Russia today, I understand it is the case that there has been a lot of agitation about the fact that this war has not gone efficiently as planned. And as you rightly know, over the course of the past few months, there have been reorganizations of the Russian military, basically in response to the fact that it has not been going well. So in my research about this new announcement, it's really the case that Russia, first and foremost, has recognized that there is more to be done from a military standpoint. Russia has basically communicated that more investments are going to be made into military hardware, military intelligence, etc., as well as a restructuring of the army. This demonstrates to me that there's a long-term approach because, of course, as with any country, if you have gone with stated military objectives and you have, for lack of a better word, woefully actually failed to meet those objectives, then it behoves on you to re-strategize and basically go back to the drawing board. So I think this is a long-term viewpoint as to what the Russian military should be, particularly because now it is clear that they wouldn't want it to be seen as it is almost becoming perceived worldwide that they are a spent military force. Not to do this will allow such a perspective to then ferment in the minds of people and then become the mainstream approach or idea about Russian military might, with significant effect, I would say, on the Russian side for geopolitical relations as well as the geopolitical ordering of what the powers are today.
And the many other questions that this action begs is, are they trying to say that this will continue to 2026? It's bolstering its army to 1.5 million and more. Will there be more mobilizations, more Russians who would have to join in this war? But let's look at, over the weekend, what we saw, one of the biggest strikes to a residential building in Dnipro. Many deaths, many injured. Someone said that perhaps this will be happening more often. But then we're hearing Russia saying that, they're not responsible for the strike.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, first, it's the case that it's a very difficult place to be in that we currently are in right now. I recall the very first time I had a chat with you. This was very early days in the invasion, and we had expected and hoped that we'll be seeing less civilian casualties arising from this war. But today that does not seem to be the case. But I think there are a number of factors that will help us better understand what happened in Dnipro. First and foremost is the type of weaponry that was utilized. It's a weapon that is very effective, very calamitous, but it is also very inaccurate. So that has been one of the major issues with this weapon's use. And in fact, despite the fact that this weapon was basically commissioned into service in 1960, the first time it saw combat was 2016. And it was actually set up for maritime targets and the like. When you utilize such a weapon in an area that has civilian participation or civilian presence, I would imagine that you have to take responsibility for whatever arises therefrom. That is one bucket. The second bucket of things is that while the Ukrainians now have a retinue of weapons and a retinue of defensive weapons that can take out, missiles and the like, it is clearly the case that the Ukrainian military today does not actually have the type of defense weaponry to take out this type of missile. What does that mean? That means that this country, I would say, is a sitting duck to more attacks if such attacks could happen from this Russian Kh-22 missile. However, the Patriot defense system that the United States has pledged to give to the Ukrainians is stated by military experts to have the capacity to defend against such missiles. If such Patriot defense systems are available, one would expect that we would see less type of, situations as we saw with Dnipro, with over 40 civilians dead and so much more wounded. But Millicent, I think the critical point is that when you're in war, these things are bound to happen. And this is why war is never a beautiful thing. It is never poetic. It never has a smile at the end of it all. It's just something you trudge onto until the gory clouds basically fade away.
Well, talking about the tanks, armored vehicles, Ukraine is asking for more, a triad of weapons, defense systems, artillery systems. So far, what would you see changing in this war? I know you earlier, it seems you believe that it's not coming in fast enough if they're sitting ducks and promises have been made. But do you see this making any changes to favor Ukraine in this fight?
Well, I think that Ukraine has been very well armed by NATO partners, and it has been a very, very clear solidarity march, I would say, by many of the Western partners. I believe the question as to whether this will change things is best answered by a military expert, and not just a military expert, but one who has boots on the ground. That being said, I would say that what this has so far done, if we should look at the precedent of whenever new weapons and armory go into Ukraine, is that it potentially helps Ukraine to further defend itself, defend its borders, and reclaim new ground. There was a time that it appeared that there was a significant Ukrainian offensive. That does not seem to be the case right now. It appears now that we are in a situation of drudgery where people are just playing out and it seems like it's long drawn out. But it is the case that, to my mind, for Ukraine to be able to turn the situation in this war, it would go beyond just a few weapons being given, but something much more significant. And I think this is consistent with the views of Vladimir Zelensky in many of his recent pronouncements and discussions, as well as writings, where he has spoken of the fact that he is thankful for what has been provided and what continues to be provided, but so much more is required. We do not forget that Russia is still a military superpower. Russia still has a lot of military expertise, as well as a military arsenal, as well as, the Wagner Group and other non-state, should I say, paramilitary services that are fighting this war and fighting it bitterly. So I think if you want there to be a table turn beyond the scope of negotiation, you will need a superior effort, or should I say superior supplies of Ukraine, potentially much more than they currently have, and enough to not only match the Russians, but potentially to exceed the Russians in order for them begin to reclaim what they have categorized or termed to be their own heartland and to be their own borderlands that need to be reclaimed.
Michelle Agatishe, Foreign Affairs commentator, it was a pleasure having you join us. Thank you so much and best wishes of the new year.
Thank you very much, Millicent. Cheers, and thank you for having me.
Well, to other stories, still on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Kyiv's mayor Vitaly Klitschko says the city's infrastructure could collapse at any second as Russia's sporadic missile attacks, along with freezing winter temperatures, put local authorities under increasing strain. Vitaly and his brother Vladimir told local reporters at Davos that Ukraine's Western allies had to speed up deliveries of air defense systems capable of downing Russian missiles. Kyiv has accused Moscow of indiscriminately targeting civilians as well as key infrastructure, threatening the winter supply of electricity, running water and central heating.
We don't talk about the collapse, but can happen any second, because any second Russian rockets can destroy our critical infrastructure in our hometown in Kyiv, and not just in Kyiv, in other cities. That's why we have a deficit of energy around 30% right now in Kyiv. Now in Ukraine, pretty cold. -10, -20, sometime in winter -30 degrees, and in this weather condition, to live without electricity, to live without heating, it's almost impossible. And that's why situation is critical. We fighting to surviving.
The Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, says the agency's priority in Ukraine is to ensure the security and safety of all of Ukraine's nuclear plants. Mr. Rafael Grossi made the comments during a visit to the South Ukraine nuclear power plant in Yuzhno-Ukrainsk. During a news conference held at the complex, Grossi and Ukraine's Energy Minister Herman Halushenko were asked about the continued occupation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Russian-controlled Ukraine and the IAEA's legal standing on the situation.
This is a part of a set of missions we are starting today here at South Ukraine. We are going to be continuing in Rivne, Khmelnytsky next week, and also Chernobyl. The priority now is to ensure the security and the safety of the plant. It doesn't matter what we can discuss at this moment on high legal issues. What we need to prevent is an accident, and what we need to make sure is that this plant is in safe condition, is in an operational condition, and that we prevent this tragedy from happening. So we are leaving now a group of experts who are going to be staying here permanently, and it will be the same in all these other places, working hand in hand with our Ukrainian hosts to facilitate some technical support, delivery of equipment, to make sure that all these facilities that are so important for the country, and especially at this very difficult time, can continue running normally and without any problem.
Meanwhile, a shipload of U.S. military hardware has arrived in the Danish port of Aarhus ahead of a series of training exercises across NATO's eastern frontier countries. The U.S. Army's 2nd Armored Brigade Combat Team, 1st Cavalry Division, Fort Hood, Texas, is arriving in Europe for a 9-month rotation as part of Atlantic Resolve, a NATO operation which the U.S. Army says provides rotational deployment of combat credible forces to Europe. Shipments of military hardware also arrived last week at the port of Vlissingen in the Netherlands.
We are downloading 2nd Brigade, 1st Cavalry Division, who arrived here from Fort Hood, Texas. They're here as part of the Atlantic Resolve NATO-led training exercise. They'll be in Europe for around 9 months. And what we're doing this morning specifically is downloading their equipment off of the vessel behind me.